Welcome back, everyone. So let's continue styling this reducer. Here, what you'll notice is that our action cannot destructure payload. When we hover over it, it says property payload does not exist on category action. The reason for this is because inside of our union type, we have actions that do not have a payload property. So as I mentioned before, even though we are passing in a payload right here that points to void, this action does not have a payload value. So as a result, you cannot destructure something that does not exist. So even though on some of our action types inside of category action, they are actions with payloads. But the moment you have one that does not have that property, this will not work. And this is fine. We can just get rid of this call right here where we destructure. Instead, we'll switch right on action.type. And what we'll say is that categories, action.payload, and error, action.payload. So no destructuring. And instead what happens, you'll notice, is that because we're switching on the type, TypeScript is smart enough to know that if your case hits this fetch category start, then what you're going to get here in the action is a regular action. Similarly, if you're inside and you pass this fetch category success, then this action type must be of fetch category success, and therefore the payload must be the correct payload. So that's one of those benefits that we get by creating this union type, and TypeScript is smart enough to know that based on what checks and what passes, it will narrow the type down to what must be the case of this action by the time you get here. Now what we need to do is also we need to type this initial state. So here I'm going to say export type category state is equal to this object where we know this is read only because we cannot ever modify these values. So read only is an additional property you can add so that you force it that this state object can never be modified. It can only be read. And again, with the reducers, you never modify the state. You always spread over and create a new state. Now, the values, of course, are categories, which is a category array. So let's ensure that we bring that in. And then read only, we also need is loading, which is a Boolean. And finally, we have error, which can initialize as an error or as null. So now we save that and you'll look at this and you'll notice that this is pretty much what our initial state value will be. And because this initial state value is being cast here, this is going to inherit that and state will always be of type category state. And now we have typed out this reducer as well as this initial state, as well as the state value as well. So there we go. We have typed out our reducer. The key thing here is that now we're using this discriminatory union in order for us to state that this is what must be the types of actions that our reducer responds to. The last thing we need to type out is our selector. So here inside of the selector, I'm also going to rename this to .ts. The moment we start actually converting our selectors over, until you convert all of them, TypeScript is actually not going to compile for all of this code. And the reason why is because we do not have a root state type for our top level selector yet. So what you'll notice is whenever you check your application, unfortunately, it will always throw an error until we get to the section where we type out the root state. So in this conversion, we can't check that everything is continuing to work unless we type the selectors last. But again, I'm trying to show you this process of typing out these files. So just follow along, and once we're finished everything, it will all work anyways. And as far as typing our selector goes, we just need to think about what it is that the selector needs to actually return back. So inside, again, at this top level, here we know that we're turning back the category slice, which we just defined as the categories state. So this is what we want to return back. right here. And now, if you actually look inside of this selector, it's actually smart enough to know what the types are now. Because again, this category state is what gets returned by this selector. So then this value that it receives, this parameter, must be the category state. So if we pluck off the categories value, then select categories returns a memoized selector. So that's what all of that stuff near the end is showing you. But notice how what it returns back is the category array, which is what this categories value points to. Now for this next selector, we see that we are indeed typing already, and the TypeScript compiler knows that we're getting the category array. However, it doesn't know what to do with this categories reduce because it doesn't actually know what this accumulator value is, since it's of any type right now. It's just an empty object. So what we need to do is we need to type explicitly what we expect the category map to be. So inside of our category type, I am going to now create a category map type. So here, we're going to need to export this out as we have been doing. So export type category map. So what is the category map? Essentially, it's going to be a bunch of different key value pairs. And the pair value is going to be category items arrays, because we're essentially converting this category object, which is an array of these categories, over to a map. Now, in order for us to say that this key is just going to be any string, you're going to use these square brackets and you're going to say the key is just some string value. It can be any value. It doesn't matter. It's just a string. Because we don't know actually what the key is going to be. It's based off of the title. So this allows us to just say, hey, all I know is that this key is a string. But the value is definitely going to be a category item array. And that is our category map. Next, all we need to do is just import this in to our selector file. And now what we can say is that from this selector, we're going to return a category map. And this object right here, we can type as category map, like so. So right now, essentially, you generally don't want to cast anything because essentially you're overwriting the type. You're telling TypeScript that this type is going to be something. But here with reduce, we know that what we're building out is going to be this category map object. So this is a place where it's relatively type safe to do this. But now we at least have typed out all of our action creators. Again, I'm going to mention that until we build out all of these reducers, we can't technically type out this root state. So that's what we're going to do next. But at the very least now, we have typed out everything except our sagas. The sagas we're going to type last because they're a little bit more complicated, so I want to explain what we're going to do with sagas. But at the very least, we have pretty much struck a general pattern for typing out the actions, the reducers, as well as the selectors. Now let's take what we've learned and continue typing out the rest of these Redux files. I'll see you in the next video.